And we are live, but we are still waiting for people. There we go. People are starting to trickle in. I got
Hello,
a couple.
people. Welcome. Okay, people are showing up. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good night, wherever you may be joining us from. Hello. Happy to have you here. We're going to have a pretty good lesson today. We're going to give it just a few minutes or 30 seconds to a minute here to allow people to get in and join on here. But we'll dive right into the topic very shortly. All right. So we're filling up here. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Those of you who are joining, happy to have you. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, from wherever you may be. I hope you are well. Hope you are safe and sane, keeping those hands washed, not touching your face too much. It's funny how much you don't realize that you touch your face all the time when people tell you not to touch your face anymore.
Do you know how totally hard that is?
It's when you have to think about not touching your face, all you want to do is touch your face.
Exactly.
I hate it.
Yeah, you keep talking about it. I'm going to want to touch my face.
Yeah, okay. We'll change the subject. Welcome to everyone that's still joining. Looks like we had a hand raised. Nope, maybe not. Very excited for this webinar today. It's going to be a pretty fun topic. It's going to be a bit of a dense topic. We have a little bit to get through here, so hopefully we can get through it. I'll go ahead and I'll reiterate this once a few more people join up, but there are a couple of ways that we've given you that you can interact. The idea behind these webinars is to make them interactive to some level, so you can ask questions about the topic and you can talk with me directly if you need to. There's two ways to do that, and that would be a Q&A that we've set up. If you look in your little chat window, you should have a Q&A, and you can just drop questions right in there. And we will see those, and we can either respond directly or they can be directed to me, and I can address them live on camera. You also have a raise hand option. If you want to, you can go ahead and raise your hand, and we can open up your microphone if you have a microphone. If you want to talk and ask a question directly, out to the webinar, that is fine too. So we want to give you guys the option to chat with us and ask questions as you might have them. And if not, that's fine too. Don't feel obligated to. I'll just talk to myself the whole time, and that's totally fine. Okay, we've got a good amount of people in here. We'll get going in maybe about 30 seconds. We'll dive right in here. Before we do get going, I'd like to introduce the other people on the webinar this morning. They're going to be helping out. We've got Golden Preciado. And
hello.
Hello, Golden. And Eric Torres is on the call as well. So they are going to be helping out with the questions and kind of directing questions to me. I'm going to be more or less just kind of running through this presentation here. This does, I'm sure everybody got the email. I hope everyone got the email. I know that we did have some people that registered this morning. If that's the case, you would not have received this email, but there was an assets package that was available to download, which included some audio tracks and some scenes that I pre-created for you if you wanted to follow along, if you have a mixer and if you're able to follow along. So if you did get those, hopefully that was smooth. I did get a notification that there might have been some trouble with our server being a little slow this morning. If you were trying to download that earlier this morning, I apologize for that. So we're still finding our stride a little bit with these webinars and trying to figure out the best way to kind of present this content to you. But if you did get those, we'll go in a minute. We'll go through how to bring that up on our mixer so you can follow along. If you didn't, it's totally fine. You definitely still be able to take a lot away from this. And the main reason we offer those tracks is because the audio that you're going to hear from my mixer on your end over Zoom is not going to be that great, but for the purposes of this, you'll get an idea of what's happening and what the different effects are doing as we go through them. So I hope everyone has fun. I hope everyone gets something out of this. And again, feel free to ask questions. I'm going to go ahead and get going at this point, I think. Let's just kick us off here, and then if other people decide to join, they're late. So today we're talking about effects. Surprise, TouchMix has effects. The TouchMix, all three TouchMixes have the same 6 effects. Now these are studio grade effects that they offer professional signal enhancements and what's really great about these is that we can do this without sacrificing auxes or additional channels. So all the effects on TouchMix are dedicated, and we're not sacrificing any other features in order for you to use them. So again, there are 6 effects total, and they are modeled after very popular go-to effects hardware pieces, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at the effects. Before diving in, I do want to explain the difference in the effect versus the effect engine or processor. The TouchMix 8 and 16 are going to have 4 effects engines, also known as a processor, where the TouchMix 30 has 6. Now, this doesn't mean that you have less effects on the 8 and the 16. You can just run 2 less instances of them, or you can run 4 effects at a time versus 6 at a time. But we've all got the same effects here, and based on the mixer you're working with, either 4 or 6 is a great number to have at your disposal. For most applications, you really don't need much more than that. Great, let's talk about them. I'm going to switch to my mixer view here, and you can see my mixer. And to start this off, I'm going to go directly to the effects masters, and we're going to actually just look at all the effects first and foremost, and get an idea of what we have at our disposal here. So to get to my effects masters, I'm going to, up in the navigation strip here at the top, I'm going to select the effects masters tab right there like that, and this is going to bring up all of my effects master faders. Now, I'm using a TouchMix 30 for this demonstration, so you can see my 6 effects channels here. These are all of my effects processors. This is the main channel for my effects processors. These faders are going to control the overall output level for all of my effects. Now, to access the effects themselves and the different effect parameters, I'm simply going to select the name of the effect channel above the fader, just like you would any other channel on the mixer. So if I press effects 1 at the top like that, there we go. That has brought me directly into the effect and has brought me right to my effect tab here. We have a couple of other tab options. This looks very similar to an input or an output channel strip, but this is an effect channel. And so the main screen in here is the effect itself. So right now in my effect tab, I'm looking at the effect for effects 1. I can see that I'm in my effects 1 channel right there. And this looks like it's set up as a dense reverb right now. And if I press home to get back out to my main mix screen, and hit the home button, that always takes you, almost always, we'll talk about that, takes you back out to your main faders here. I can punch into any of my other effects here and see what's recalled. Looks like I got a pitch shifter on effects 4, that's fun. And I can either go out and then punch into individual channels as a navigation option, or I can use my previous and next buttons if I just want to scroll or scrub through my channels linearly. So I can go ahead and hit previous here and back myself through back to input 1 or effects 1 there. And now these are already set up with something, but if we want to recall different effects into any of these effects processors, you do that with this plus symbol button right here next to the name of the effect. You'll see this field here. It displays the current effect name, and there's a little plus symbol button there. If I touch that, that brings up this window here. Now this displays all of the available effects on TouchMix total. So we can see all 6 effects here, and I can recall any one of these that I want to into my mixer. So we got a mono, a stereo delay, a chorus, a pitch shifter, a dense, and a lush reverb. And we're going to go ahead and run through a little bit on all of these right now. So if I wanted to change my effects 1 to my first effect here, which is the mono delay, I can press mono delay there, and now that has recalled the mono delay effect into my effects 1 processor. And I can do this on any and all of my effects. So you can recall, different effects within your different effects processors that you can then use, or if you want multiple instances of the same effect, you can do that as well. Any combination of the different effects you want to use, you have that at your disposal. And it's very simple to just recall the different ones into any of the effects there. So right now, we're looking at our mono delay. And now a delay, very simply, is an effect that takes it's an input signal and delays it. So it'll have an initial delay or an echo. You can think of it as an echo. And then it'll allow you to regenerate that over time as well at a set cadence. And all of that is controlled with these first 3 knobs here. The initial delay is going to be set with this dial here, and that is expressed in milliseconds. So that's saying, right now with my 250 delay preset, it's going to delay my initial sound at 240 milliseconds. So you hear the first sound, 240 milliseconds later, you hear the first echo of that. You hear the first delay. And then every delay after that is going to happen at a rhythm or a cadence of 250 beats per minute. And I can adjust that in a couple of ways. I can select that field there, it highlights yellow, and I can use my knob. So I'm selecting that with my left hand and using my right hand on the knob to adjust that parameter, and that works with all parameters. That's our touch and turn technique there. Or I can enable the tap tempo. Now, you won't be able to see my dial on through my camera here, but if you have your mixer in front of you, you should see this happen. If I enable tap tempo there, the dial is actually going to start blinking at whatever rhythm it is currently set to. And if you tap on the dial at the pace or the rhythm you would like it to be set to, you might be able to hear me ticking on this. There you go. And then that just sets it to whatever rhythm you'd like there. So the tap tempo is a very common control on a delay. And it really helps you kind of find the actual rhythm of whatever the music or the song that you're applying the effect within. Okay. And then your regeneration here simply sets the amount of the regenerated delays after your initial delay. And it allows it to kind of taper off and fade out over a specific amount or a set amount of time. And this is expressed as a percentage. So at 0, just to give you an idea of what this is doing and how this works, if you set this to 0, you're not going to hear any of the effect or any of the delays after the initial delay. So you hear the initial sound and then one delay after it, so one echo. Inversely, if you turn that all the way up, then it's just going to repeat that sound indefinitely at the same volume forever. So you set this to somewhere in between, and it gives you a nice sort of taper off of the effect as it kind of echoes and bounces down and fades out. All right, so that is a mono delay. Next, let's look at the stereo delay. Now, this is the same thing, but instead of it being a mono effect, it's splitting it up across the stereo field. So you actually have two channels of the effect. You've got your channel 1, your channel 2, which is your left and your right. So these are going to be heard independently out of your left and your right channels. And you can set them differently. So you can set up your left channel differently than your right channel. You can change the tempos and you can change the regeneration times of each one of those, and that allows you to create a little bit more of a layered kind of texture to the effect, and it's a little bit more complex that way. This is one of the most common applications for a stereo delay is setting up what's known as a ping pong delay. And we actually have a preset for that in here as well. But that if you're familiar with that term, a stereo delay is how you get that effect. So stereo delay, pretty simple. We also have a chorus. We'll talk about the chorus just for a second here. And now a chorus is going to be what's known as a modulating effect. And when I say modulating, it means it's doing this. It is modulating the sound in some way, and what the chorus is doing is it's going to be modulating the pitch and the phase over time using an LFO. So it's using an LFO to kind of modulate some of the pitch and time parameters to sort of give it almost a wobbling effect, and then it's going to layer that with the original sound, and what that does is it just sort of kind of like thickens the original sound a little bit depending on how much of the effect you apply. And then in the middle here you have sort of two different ways, or you can define the modulations by using either a sine wave or a saw wave, and that just kind of changes the characteristics of those modulations a little bit. This is very commonly used on guitar. It can sound really great on guitar and various other instruments. It can also be used to thicken up a vocal a little bit. You probably wouldn't want to use it too much, but you can use it in that application, or maybe to thicken up a backing vocal section, things like that. So this is our chorus effect. It's pretty nice to have that at your disposal. Next, we'll go ahead and look at the pitch shifting effect, and its name should be pretty self-explanatory. This is something that is just going to alter the pitch of the incoming signal. This is essentially also can be known as a harmonizer. So it's just taking the initial signal in, and it allows you, with these controls here, to adjust that pitch in the left and right channel independently, which is kind of key here to getting a nice sound out of this. So you can change the pitch of the incoming signal. You can also delay the incoming signal, or how the pitched variant of the incoming signal is heard. And again, this is very commonly used as like a thickening agent. You can use this when you set these to very, very small degrees, and then kind of just sneak it right underneath a channel. It can add this kind of nice thickening effect, almost like a doubling effect sometimes, depending on how much you apply. But that is our pitch shifter. Let's go ahead and take a look at the reverbs now. And the reverbs are sort of the prize here. These were meticulously modeled after a couple of actually very well known and very well used specific rack processors. The dense reverb here was modeled after a Yamaha unit, and the lush reverb is modeled after a very popular Lexicon unit. So if you're familiar with those units, you might kind of be familiar with the look and feel and the sound that this delivers. So not only were they modeled after these specific units, we actually also included presets in there that were very, very closely modeled after a few well-known and well-beloved presets on these particular models themselves. So these are a great asset here that we've included on this mixer. A lot of time and energy went into creating these reverbs and getting them, just right to really effectively model the Yamaha and the Lexicon models here that we were trying to get after. So you've got that built right into your board. These things sound great. The presets on them sound great, and you really can operate these things largely with the presets alone. There are a few dials and knobs on each one of these, and I'll talk a little bit about them. But the presets are gonna handle a lot of this for you, and based on what your application is. And just to give you a rounded idea of what reverb is doing, reverb is actually a natural phenomenon, and what a reverb effect is doing, it is sort of modeling or emulating this phenomenon that is naturally occurring. And what happens to best explain this, think of a room, and think of a sound in a room. Maybe there's a singer or guitar player in the room with you, and they're singing and they're playing their guitar, and the sound from that source is going to reach your ears directly. And it's also going to initially bounce off the floor and then into your ears. So you're going to get those two different things that are going to hit you a little bit differently. So you have the direct sound and then that initial floor bounce sound, which is going to be referred to a lot of times as a pre-delay or initial delay in the effect itself. And what those two variants are going to tell your brain, they're going to give you a good idea of kind of the size and the characteristics of the space you're in. And then after that, the sound is going to kind of travel around the room, because it's not just going to go directly to you. It's not in a funnel going directly to your ears. It's going to disperse throughout the room or the space, and it's going to reflect off of the various surfaces that are in that room, and then all of those sounds are going to eventually travel to your ear, and all of those reflections build the characteristics of what that space sounds like. So our reverbs here, or any reverb unit, is essentially emulating those reflections. It's digitally creating and emulating those reflections and adding that to your channel, to the sound that you're feeding into it, and giving you that sort of aural sensation of a space being, or that sound being in a specific space. There you go. Hopefully you're able to follow that. But the main things you want to focus on when you're working with a reverb, if you know nothing else about reverb, are the first two controls here. We have a reverb time and initial delay time, and we're going to experiment with those in a minute here. But basically, those are going to have the largest effect on the way the reverb sounds. So your reverb time here is going to dictate how long the reverb lasts. And to specify what this means, is this is actually expressed as what's known as an RT60. So this is an RT60 control, and I could throw this up for you for a second right there. There you go. So what an RT60 control is that's reverb time 60, and it's the time it takes for a sound to attenuate by 60 dB, not degrees. So that is, you have your initial sound, and then at the point it'll attenuate by 60 dB. That is your total reverb time, and so we can adjust that with this dial here. So if I set it to 3 milliseconds, now I'm saying it's going to take 3 milliseconds for the initial sound to decay or to attenuate by 60 dB. That's what we're saying. Now that's how we can control the size of the reverb here, and how much room it is going to apply around the sound. And then your initial delay is the time in between your original sound and the first reflection. So that, think of that as the floor bounce, if you're thinking about the physical model analogy. So that is the time in between where it actually starts reverberating, really. And that can be very useful because adjusting this this control here will really help you to dial in the reverb and make sure that it isn't muddying up the original sound. You don't really want to start reverberating before the initial impulse of whatever you're applying this to has finished. In particular, a vocal, and again, we're going to listen to some things here and we'll play with this, but a vocal in particular, depending on the cadence of the speech or the song, it you know, if your reverb kind of starts too early within their phrase, it can start to build up and get a little mud happening in there. So you want to maybe adjust this. If you find that the reverb is muddying up your channel a little bit, play with your initial delay time and you'll be able to clean that right up. So right there's your two main controls there. The rest of the controls are more or less going to get into the minutia of the rest of the reflections and how those behave and how that affects the overall character of the reverb. But really, these two are what you should focus on, and the presets can pretty much handle the rest for you. I'm very quickly going to just go into our Lush reverb as well. The main difference between these two, as I mentioned, they're modeled after two different actual units, but the biggest difference you're going to hear in their sound is just different coloration and slightly different characteristics. The Lush reverb, we labeled it a Lush reverb because it gives a very lush sound and gives a very, very nice, warm characteristic to the overall sound, whereas the dense reverb is a little tighter and is a little bit more representative of an actual physical space. So you can use them kind of based on what sound you're going for and what the particular style of music is you're mixing or applying these to, and what the actual sound source is that you're applying these to. So just kind of keep those things in mind. Just to give you a loose example, if you're working with like a jazz vocal, the Lush reverb might work a little better just because it has certain characteristics that tend to accentuate, you know, that style a little better than the dense. And so there are additionally other applications that might work better for the dense. It's kind of up to you to pick which one is going to work best for your application. So those are the effects on TouchMix. They're extremely handy. They sound very good. And now we need to apply them. So how do we get channels into these effects? To do that, I'm going to press my home button and get out to my main mix screen. And at this time, I'm going to go ahead and open up a scene that I've created. And if you were able to get the downloadable assets, please follow me here. I'm going to go ahead and walk us through how to get our initial scene started. I created a scene with a mix already created, so I've got kind of channel levels and I've got some presets on all of my channels here. So we're assuming at this point in our workflow, we've already done all that. We have the mix created. Now we're just applying the effects. We're sweetening it with our effects here, applying the special sauce. All right, so to access my scenes, I can either hit the scenes button right up above the main fader here, or I can go to my menu, press my menu button, and then I select scenes in the menu here. And this is where we can save and recall scenes. Just really quickly, a scene you can think of as a global snapshot of all of the settings on the mixer. So you can save a scene and it will save the entire setup of the mixer, and then you can recall that scene later and the mixer will reset itself into that state and into that configuration. We also do include a number of factory scenes which are extremely helpful starting points. You can see that they're arranged by kinds of applications. We've got a corporate event, country band, jazz, rock band, singer-songwriter, a couple of different variants of different applications that you might be running, and you can quickly recall that and it'll configure the entire board, including presets and effects for those particular applications, and then you can kind of fine-tune them from there if you need to. But what we're going to do is recall a scene that we've created, or that I've created, and I've given to you, I've given to some of you. So to get that going, you're going to find this if you have your USB storage device connected to the mixer. You'll find that scene in the USB field here. I've got mine is one of my mixer scenes here. I'm going to go ahead and select FX starting scene. Now there are two variations of this. The session that I've used, the tracks that I've used, it is a full 24-track recorded session. And on the TouchMix 30, that's awesome. We have all 24 of those channels. On the 8 and 16, however, we're going to end up losing some of those channels. So I created an alternate session for 8 and 16 users where I've kind of just picked out and bundled together a mix down of the larger mix. And so I've included just some of the elements that we're actually going to be working with and a few other things just to give it sort of a well-rounded mix. So you'll be working with that one. So depending on what mixer you're working with, if you're using a 30, you can grab the FX starting scene. If you got the 8 and the 16, go ahead and choose the FX starting scene mixdown, MXD. It's my abbreviation for mixdown. So based on what you got, go ahead and recall that. If you weren't able to get the assets, don't do this part. But you'll still be able to follow along, I think. So to recall this scene, I've got it selected here. I'm going to simply hit the green recall button, and then I'm going to confirm it. And then we'll wait for the current scene field here to display the name of the scene that we wanted to recall. So it'll display there, and also in the scene button up above the main fader, it should also tell you what scene is currently recalled on the mixer. Once you see that there, then we can hit home and get back out to our mix. And if we go over to inputs 1 through 8, we can see we've got some channels set up and we've got some processing applied. And if we scrub through the rest of the channels here, if you're on a 30, you'll see we've got our full 24 channel mix. I'm going to go back into my 1 through 8. And if you're using an 8 and 16, we're primarily going to be working with the snare drum and the vocal channel. Largely, when you're working with effects, you want to focus on the vocals. That is pretty much 99 to 100% of the time, you're going to apply effects to the vocals. Now, there also might be other elements that you're going to work with and apply effects to, but you probably start with the vocals. For what I'm going to show off right now, I'm actually not going to start with the vocals. I'm going to start with a snare because I want to talk about and show off a couple of things with a snare in particular first. Then we'll dive into a vocal. So whatever mix you've got, go ahead and let's enter into our snare channel here. And that's going to take us into our channel strip. And just like we entered into the effects channel, we did that. I'll do that one more time. Home to faders. I'm going to touch the name of the channel. That enters us into the channel. We can access all of its processing. We're going to go straight to the effects tab here because we're working with effects. All right. So now the next step is we want some audio. We're going to do that in a second. But just to give you the layout of this screen, I have all of my available effects right on this screen, lined up right there. And if I want to apply any of these effects, all I have to do is simply grab this slider and use my wheel to adjust its level. Just like that. That's it. Very simple. Now, what I'm doing is sending this channel, I'm sending my snare channel now to this effect. And I can do that with any one of them. I can apply any number of my available effects to the channel at any amount that I want to. And you'll be able to hear that immediately if you have audio playing. Now, a couple of these other parameters shown here are the most critical, you could say, controls for the effect itself. You have that right on the screen. So if you need to adjust, if you're working with a delay, if you need to adjust your delay time or your regeneration, you got those controls right there. Also, watch this though. If you do need to get back into the effect, all the global parameters, all the effects parameters, these thumbnails here are actually active buttons. I can press my mono delay button there, and there we go. Now we're back to this screen. This should look familiar. We were just here. So that actually navigates us back into our main effects channel here, and so we can make changes to this effect as we see fit. And then this is another thing that's interesting about this. So the option to access the effect directly from within your channel strip and get back there instantly can really help with your effects workflow. So if I now press home, watch that, I go back out to this screen instead of my main faders. In almost every instance, your home button takes you to the main fader mix, your big fader mix. There are 3 instances in which it doesn't do this, and that is for workflow purposes, and this is one of them. So if I go into an effect, I can make some changes, and if I press home, now I'm back in my effects page, and now I can continue working within this channel and applying my effects here. That's important to know. A couple other things I want to point out on this screen is the simple mode. All of the parameters within TouchMix, or many of the parameters within TouchMix have a simple mode, and what this does is it simply reduces and condenses the number of controls that are presented to the user. So you see what it did there? Now I don't have any of these global controls with me. If I don't necessarily need to pay attention to those, or if I don't have as much experience working with effects, This can just kind of clean things up a little bit. I don't have to worry about that. And now I'm only applying the effect itself with the little slider. If I want to see all that stuff, I can get it back very easily. I also want to show you this quickly on the reverb itself. So if I get into the reverb there, I have a simple mode on my reverb. And if I press simple mode, look what I'm left with. I'm left with my size and my pre-delay or initial delay, depending on which of the two you're working with. That control is named a little differently. Same thing. But remember, I talked about up front that those are going to be your two most important controls, or the things that you're going to want to focus the most on when working with a reverb. Simple mode just gives you that. So you have that option when you're working with your effects. Okay, let's get some sound happening. So if you're following along, we're going to go ahead and start playing our tracks. We're going to do this by pressing the record play button like that. And we're going to need to recall the session that is on the drive that we've connected here. To get to that, first of all, you're going to want to make sure that you're in this recording mode. If you're on a TouchMix 30, make sure that you have your recording transport mode. This means that you are in the multi-track USB mode. And to change this and to get to here, you're going to press record mode. And that's going to give us this little window here. Make sure you're in the middle. It says multi-track USB. If you're on an 8 and 16, you're going to have the multi-track and stereo MP3 options. Make sure that you've got multi-track USB selected. We have that, so we're here. Now we have record setup, and this takes us into our USB sessions, which are all the sessions that are saved on our USB drive. I am going to select the brown bottle of flu session. So you'll probably see two sessions. If you're able to download these, you've got your brown bottle of flu, which is the full complete mix, and then you've got brown bottle down mix, which is the down mix that I created for the 8 and the 16. So select which one is applicable to your mixer and hit the recall button and confirm it, and then we'll be able to see in the current session field right there that it has been recalled. And we'll hit record play again to take us back to our transport. And I've already set all of these to track in the scene. So we're good to go at this point. I'm going to just restart my timeline, restart that to 0, and then we can hit play and go. Before we do that though, I want to give us the ability to isolate a couple of channels. And we're going to do that using mute groups. I'm not going to go too much into mute groups. We're going to have an entirely separate webinar on groups next week. But just to set this up quickly, you can follow me along on this one. This is a great way of being able to mute a number or a group of channels all at once. And we're going to do this to allow us to solo out our snare and our vocal channel. So I'm going to create 2 mute groups. To do that, I'm going to press the mute groups button, which you'll find in the button cluster above the wheel. You can't see it in my camera view here, but it's there, I promise. If you've got a mixer in front of you, you should be able to see that. Just look above your wheel. You've got a cluster of buttons there. Press mute groups, and you'll get to this screen here. Now, we've got 8 mute groups available. This is how I can activate my mute groups. To set up my mute groups, I'm going to press this edit button right in the upper right-hand corner. Now we've got our edit mode. I have tabs in my navigation up at the top so that I can get to all of my 8 individual mute groups and configure them here. These are just assignment buttons, so now I'm assigning all of the channels that I want to be muted by this group. The first one I'm going to do is our snare, so I'm going to just select every single channel except for my snare channel. Now, if you're using a TouchMix 30, there is another way to accomplish this, and I'll touch on that briefly, but this is something that can be done on all 3 mixers. It's a mute group to solo out some channels right now. So I've got everything but my snare selected. I'm going to go into mute, and I'm going to hit solo snare, enter, and I've got another one here. I'm going to go into mute 2, and I'm going to set this up for my vocal channel. So I've got solo snare as 1. I've got everything selected except for my snare. I've named it solo snare. And then in mute 2, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to mute everything except for my male vocal channel. Now, depending on which mixer you're working with, if you've got an 8 or 16, all of your tracks are just going to be within the first 8 right there. So just make sure you select them accordingly. And I can name this Vox Solo. Great, now we're set up. Now I'm going to press the mute groups button again, the physical button, to take us back out to our mute groups page. Now we can see we've got a solo snare and a solo Vox. Go ahead and press the mute for the solo snare. So now we're going to isolate our snare drum here. Now I'm going to press record play one more time to start our track playback. Now we can see immediately all of our channels except for our snare have been muted. Now if I hit play here, don't want it to hit you too hot. All right, so you should hear a snare drum on your own playback. you should also be able to hear the snare drum, my snare drum here. Might not sound fantastic to you, and I apologize for that. Thanks, Zoom. Now, let's apply some reverb to this snare. I'm going to hit the snare channel. I'm going to go into my snare channel here, and we can hear what it sounds like right now. We do have some processing on this channel. We've got some EQ, and there's actually a gate being applied to this channel, and it's doing a lot of good work. It's cleaning up the channel a lot and taking away a lot of the background noise and the stage wash and things like that. But we want to kind of breathe a little bit of naturalism back into it at this point, and we can do that with some reverb. And I wanted to show you this specifically because I'm going to dial up. I'm going to get my dense reverb here on my effect 1, and you'll see that when you recall a dense reverb, it automatically sets you up with the dense live plate medium preset. And that is actually exactly what I want to use for my snare drum, and this is denoted as a plate reverb. There are different types of reverbs, and I encourage you to, if you're not familiar with the different reverb types, I encourage you to explore on your own and kind of learn about those. There are room reverbs, there are hall reverbs, there are plate reverbs, there are spring reverbs. There's a few different varieties of reverbs, and it could be advantageous to go and learn about those. We don't have the time to really get into that detail here.
So Jason, I have a question.
Thank God. I'm just talking to myself
over here.
Great. Let me stop my audio here.
Asking about the solo in place function.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that. So the solo in place function is something that is exclusive to the TouchMix 30 Pro, but essentially what it does is it gives us the ability to kind of do what we do with our mute groups, but from a more individualized level. I'll show you that really briefly. What it's going to do is it actually takes your cue function here. You'll see every single channel has a cue button. And in this mode, in the cue mode, when you engage that, it's going to direct that channel's audio to the cue outputs. You have 2 cue outputs on each mixer. You have one labeled phones and one labeled monitor. And you can connect headphones or desk monitors to those outputs, and that gives you the ability to monitor individual channels through headphones or desk monitors. Very simply put, that's what the cue does. So the cue directs that to an entirely separate output. On the TouchMix 30, we have the ability to change that functionality of that to create what's known as solo in place. Real quick, to do that, I can press menu to get into my main menu of the mixer, and then in the mixer setup option right here in the lower left-hand corner, I bring up this page, and you have cue mode at the very top, and it's got solo in place. And it does give you a little flag, a little window to confirm that, because it changes the operation of that pretty significantly. And if you're actively running live audio during an event that is happening, you want to be aware that this is turned on, because what it does, if I do that, now I've got solo in place activated. If I press home back to my channels, now all of these are labeled SIP for solo in place, and they are sort of an orangish red color now to give you a little more of an indication, like, hey, make sure you know what you're doing, or make sure you want to press this button. If you now press any of those buttons, they turn green, and that actually solos that channel in the main output. So whatever you're listening to out of your main outputs, now you're only hearing that channel, or whatever channel you've activated solo in place. So this is a great tool for being able to do just this, to be able to audition channels and isolate channels and solo channels out to apply effects, or maybe apply specific processing when you only want to hear what's happening on that one channel. But it's good to know that it is turned on, and that when you engage any of those buttons, it's going to solo that channel in the main output. So if you're in the middle of a show and you're an audience watching the show, if you hit this button, now everyone's only going to hear that one channel. So that's just a little disclaimer there. But fantastic feature, fantastic question. Thank you for that. Very happy to point that out. I'm going to go ahead and change this back on my mixer. All right. Now we're back here in my snare channel. Cool. Excellent. Any other questions? Just I'll reiterate it again real quickly here in case you came in a little late. There are a couple of ways you can ask questions if you have questions. You should see a Q&A in the chat section. You can drop questions in there, and we'll see them, and they can either be answered directly or maybe brought up to me where I can address them here. You also have the option to raise your hand. So if you did want to just kind of hit the raise your hand button if you have a question, we can then unmute your microphone if you have a microphone, and you can interact with me directly. That's perfectly fine. We're happy to give you that option. If you don't want to, that's perfectly fine also. I'll just continue talking to myself. Okay. Good question about the solo in place. I'm going to keep going here on my snare drum, and I'm going to apply a plate reverb. And I wanted to talk about the plate reverb specifically because the plate reverb is actually modeled after a vocal plate reverb, but it's not labeled as a snare. It's not labeled as like a snare preset, but it has become semi-common knowledge that a plate reverb for a vocal also works really well on a snare drum. I just wanted to kind of give you that tip there. So if you're looking in your presets here and you're looking for an option to put some reverb on a snare, there are a couple of options that have plate in the name. Start with one of those. And this initial one here, this live plate medium, is an excellent option for a snare drum. So let's go ahead and I'll shut up for a second and I'll hit home to get back up to the screen, and I'll dial this up so we can hear this on the drum. And I'm going to take it to unity, which is a bit of an extreme amount, but I just want you to hear. I'm going to do this so that you can really hear how it's affecting the channel. If I even take it up a little hotter, you can really hear now there's there's some space around that snare drum, and there's a little bit more naturalness to it. Whereas if I dial it back, I've got my very tight, very dry snare drum sound. It sounds good, but it's pretty dry, so we can kind of give it some nice polish by giving it some reverb and giving it some space. Now, somewhere right around here is probably a good spot to have it. Now again, this is subjective. Effects are pretty subjective, so it's based on what you're looking for, kind of what you're trying to accomplish and where you're trying to take the sound. My job is just kind of illustrate how to get yourself there, and that's it. That's simple as that. I dial it up, I dial it back down, I find where I want it to be, and we're good. Now we can move on to the next channel, and so let's do just that. I'm actually going to turn that off for now. I'm going to go ahead and stop my audio, and I'm going to go into my vocal channel now. For me, I'm going to go into my inputs 17 through 24. If you're on a 30 here and you recalled this scene and session, we're going to go ahead and dive into the last 8 fader bank here. This is 17 through 24. Our vocal channel is going to be right here on channel 22. If you're using an 8 or 16 and you're using that mix down session, that's going to be channel 8 for you. So everyone come on in here to the vocal channel. Now we're going to apply some processing to our vocals. And again, I'm just going to illustrate some reverb here. Reverb is very commonly used on vocals. It's essentially used on lead vocals, backing vocals, and then can also be used on solo instruments, maybe a guitar that's going to take a solo, or if you've got a horn section and you've got a player that's going to take a solo at some point, give them a little bit of reverb that can kind of help bring some focus to them within the mix. And it can also have the effect of allowing things to kind of like melt into the mix a little bit. So it's at the same time sort of drawing focus by giving it some nice polish, and it can just help it blend a little better too. In particular with that snare drum, adding that reverb to that dry snare sound helps it to blend and sound a little more natural within the entire mix. All right. I'm going to play my audio again. I'm going to reset the timeline here back to the beginning. Now we'll play this, and we're listening to our vocal channel now. If you're following along with the mute groups here, let's go ahead and switch the mute groups. I'm going to press mute groups. I'm going to undo my solo snare, and now I'm going to press my Vox solo mute group. So now we've got everything turned off or muted except for our vocal channel. I'm going to hit home. Whoops. I'm going to play my audio in my record play screen, hit play here, and now I'm going to go into my vocal. Yeah. Did I get that right? Make sure I muted everything. Yep, there he is. We've got our vocalist there. Sounds awesome. If I go in here, I'm going to set this up. Let's see here. I'm actually going to start on the lush reverb here. And there we go. So when you recall a lush reverb, I believe the first preset that it is going to recall for you is the lush medium hall. So now we're looking at a hall reverb, a hall type reverb, as opposed to a plate type reverb. And I want to show you the difference in the hall and also the difference in the characteristics of the lush real quick here.
So Jason, we have a question about pre and post fader. The person wants to know what are the pros and cons and when to use pre or post.
Okay. So let me explain what that is. So pre and post just means that you're directing this, and we're actually I'm gonna show you a diagram in just a minute here, which will illustrate this a lot more clearly. But your pre and post option in your effects is going to change the pickoff point for the effect from before your channel fader, which is pre, or after your channel fader, which is post, and they will all default to post. And what that says is your actual channel fader level will dictate to some degree the amount of level that is being sent to the effect as well. So as you increase or reduce your channel fader itself, the effect will kind of follow it, or the amount of signal being sent to the effect will follow that level, and that for the most part is where you're going to want to leave it. Let's see here. Let's see if I can think of an example of when you wouldn't. Golden, do you have an example of that, or maybe Eric? Any words of wisdom on when you'd want to change it to post? Because what it's doing is it's changing those characteristics, so the channel fader no longer affects the amount being sent to the effect itself. So it's just being picked off before the fader at a set amount, and it will all that.
Well, generally, you want constant. Your effects to be in post.
Yes, generally you do.
Okay. Because if you bring it down, then you will bring the fader down. You'll only hear effect.
Exactly.
Without any.
That's yeah. So if
signal.
If it's set to pre, if you were to take that fader all the way down, you would still hear that channel because it's still going to the effect at its predetermined level. So you're not ever going to get that correlation between the channel itself and the level of the effect. You kind of want them to modulate together.
Ride together, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. Thanks. Very good. I'm going to restart here so I can show you this lush reverb. And again, I'm going to take it up around unity. Maybe a little bit more there. Oh, I'm in the wrong channel. There we go. There we go. Hear that? Hopefully you can hear that decently over the calls here. If you're following along, take note of how this sounds. And again, this is up at unity, so this is a bit of an extreme amount. This might be something that you like. You might be into this sound. But really, in a lot of applications, it'll probably sit somewhere around here, just to kind of add some color and just add some cool characteristics to that channel and give it a little bit of life. So something like that. So that is our medium hall reverb on the Lush. Great sounding preset, great sounding reverb, very, very useful. Now let's take a look at one of the other presets in the dense and put it on our vocal here. I'm going to go into the dense. I'm going to change this. I'm going to hit the preset plus button right there, which takes me into my presets for the effect. And I have all of the different presets for the effect that I'm in. So I'm looking at my current preset, which is the live plate medium. I'm going to take this, I'm going to use my vocal plate here. So D denoting dense vocal plate. I'm going to recall that. I'm going to confirm that. Boom, now I've got my vocal plate preset recalled on my effect. I'm going to hit home. Takes me back out to the effect here. I can see that that's done. I go back into my channel. Now let's pull this up. We'll get that up to unity. There you go. Turn this up a bit. Yeah. Hear what that does? It's a little bit tighter, dense, as the name kind of denotes. And if I take it down a little bit and kind of let it sit just under the channel a little bit, and then if I take up my initial delay a little bit, there we go. I can kind of adjust the timing of when the reverberation starts. And my track's over. Big finish. Okay, cool. So those are the effects, and that is how we route effects. We've taken a look at a couple of the different effects, the reverbs, and applied them a little bit here. And that is more or less one way that you could build your workflow around effects. You can kind of set up the initial effects in your effects masters and then get into your channels themselves and use the screen to fade them up and dial them up and get them going to the level you need them to. There is a much easier way to do this, though. After showing you all that, there is a really fantastic tool that TouchMix includes, which really can simplify this workflow and save a lot of time and kind of just help you. Again, if you're more of a novice, you don't have a lot of experience with effects and understanding sort of the signal path and sending and returning and things like that, this tool can be very advantageous to you. And in either regard, it's extremely fast way and efficient way of setting up your effects. And so what I'm going to go now is I'm going to go into my wizard. So you should all have a wizard button. Again, this is located in the button cluster above your wheel. It should say wizard on it. If you press that, you get a nice guy with a gray beard and a pointy hat and a staff. I'm just kidding. It's quarantine, guys. I'm bored. Okay, so this is our wizard screen. We have a number of wizards on TouchMix here. We're going to take a look at the effects wizard because this topic is dealing with effects. So if we go into the effects wizard like this, oops, I've already done some work in here. This is the effects wizard. So this is basically a one-stop shop, and one place I can come and I can configure effects across my entire mix with this tool. Instead of going into each channel individually and then going in and out of my channels and navigating to the specific channels I want to apply effects to, this can greatly simplify this entire workflow. And up at the top, I just want to highlight this. This is actually sort of a preset menu. So this can help set up the effect itself based on whatever application you're using. So if you're new to using effects and you're not quite sure what effects to apply to certain elements in your mix, this can help you out a lot. You start with your source here, and you can see the menu is arranged by instrument type. It's a good idea to premeditate your effects a little bit, kind of take inventory of the components in your mix and decide what you're going to want to use effects on. Again, 100% of the time, almost, it's going to be vocals. So that's a good place to start with. When you start setting up your effects, you figure out what you're going to do with your vocal channel and start there. So I'm going to set up my first effect as my vocal channel. I'm going to just kind of pretend like I didn't already set some stuff up earlier. I've got my mix built, and now I'm going to start applying my effects. I'm going to use this tool to do so. I'm going to start on my vocal channel. I'm going to select vocals here very simply. I know that I'm going to start with my lead vocal channel, so I can select lead vocals in the type menu there. And then my last menu here is the effects presets themselves. If you're familiar with the channel presets, this menu should look very similar. And if you participated in the last webinar dealing with presets, again, this should look very similar to you. So here we go. And now this includes all of the available or all of the recommended presets across all of our effects that you could use on a lead vocal. Now, you do want to be cognizant of what some of these are because they don't necessarily say delay or reverb, anything like that in the name, but you should be able to figure out kind of what these are based on the title of the preset. And to help you out with that, obviously, chorus medium is applying a chorus effect. Anything with a D in the beginning of it is going to be the dense reverb, so that's going to be a reverb effect. And anything with an L in front of it is going to be lush for the lush reverb. And then we've got our delays and some pitch shift down there. See there, we've got our slap delay at the very bottom. All right, so now I'm going to repeat what I just did, but I'm going to use this instead. I'm going to go with the lush medium hall. So there we go. I got my lead vocals, lush medium hall, and I hit the green recall button. And that should show up there. Let me do it one more time. Sometimes that field sticks a little bit. I'm going to punch over and then back. Nope, doesn't like it. Let me verify. Yeah, all right, so I've got it set up here. So my effect is the lush hall there. I'm going to go back into my wizard. That field seems to be sticky. I'll have to ping somebody about that. But nonetheless, we've got it configured how we want it to now. I've configured it to be using our lush medium hall reverb, and I want to put that on my vocal channel. Now, to get that on my vocal channel, I don't have to go back out to the channel and dial it up. I can do it right here. So these are all assignment buttons. This looks very similar to our mute groups, right? We just set up mute groups. Same thing, assignment buttons. So now I'm just going to select what channel I want this effect to go to. Male vocals. I'm done. I just did it. So I configured my channel, I send it to my vocals. That's it. And now from here, I can either go into my next effect, set this up for something else, and then send it where I need it to go. Or if I know that I have other additional channels that I want to send, I can do that from the same screen. So I've got 3 vocalists in total, and I can use the same reverb for all of them if you want to. So I can just punch all of those in there. I did mention that a lot of times the same reverb sounds good on a snare. So if I had set this up alternatively, like maybe I was using my plate, let's go ahead and do a vocal plate here. Yeah, we'll see we've got a vocal plate instead of the lush here. Maybe I can select my snare drum as well because I know that that's going to sound good. And I'm done. I've configured that. It's extremely easy to do. If I go back out to my mains and I go into my inputs here, if I look at all the channels that I set up here, it's given me, you know, a predetermined level for all of the effects here. And whoops, not trombone, male vocal. There we go. We've got our male vocal. I've got our 2 female vocals. They've all got effects now, you know, just a couple button presses and I'm done. So you can use that tool to very quickly and very easily configure effects for your entire mix. It's also helpful if you just want to go in and glance at what's being applied to any given effect at any time. So I can go in here and I can immediately see, okay, on my effects one, I'm sending this to these 4 channels, you know, or whatever, however that's set up. It's a one screen where you can look at the configuration of the effect. It's very effective, very easy to use. It's also handy because it's probably the easiest way to start applying effects to monitors. We're going to talk about that for a second. Applying effects to monitors. I can do that right here. I have the same assignment buttons for my inputs. I've got all my effects down here. So let's say our vocalist is now asking to hear that nice reverb in their monitor wedge. If I know, what the monitor mix they're using, I highlight that in here and it's done. It's now applying that to the monitor. There's a couple different ways that you can accomplish this same thing as well. I'm going to show you those really quickly, and then we're going to get into some signal flow a little bit because there's a couple of things that you need to understand if you're going to be applying effects to your monitors like this. So method 1, effects wizard. Simple, easy, direct. I'm now applying this effect to this aux and this aux or whatever aux I want it to go to. The other way is if I press home to get out to my mix, I can actually go into my aux mixes like this. If I go into aux 1, now if I navigate within the aux mix to my effects masters, I can now see, since I've done it already in the effects wizard, it's applying some of this effects master level to the aux mix. And that is how effects are applied to any aux or to any monitor mix, is with this fader here. And that is important to know. Okay, now for the fun part. I'm going to switch to my PowerPoint view. Here is the signal diagram for an input channel in relation to how it is directed to effects. I'm going to get my little pen tool here. We're going to have art class. Okay, so over here we have the input signal. And we have our sound source. It's going to enter the mixer through our input, then it's going to pass through our EQ and our dynamics, and then it's going to go through our channel fader, through our pan control, and then eventually out through our main output channel to our loudspeakers. Now we can hear that sound. Now as soon as we ride this fader, so you can see this here is our slider, our effects slider that we can find in our inputs. We start to bring that up, and now it is taking that signal, it is picking it off of the original signal at this point and sending it to our effect. So now we can see our pre and our post. So at post, it's taking the signal here after our fader level and then directing it to our effect at whatever amount you send it. Now this amount, because it's being picked off here, will be affected by the channel fader. And that's what we want for the most part. If you were to pick it off over here, it would just go directly to the effect at this level, and that would never change. That would never be affected by the signal level. Now afterwards, it's going to get processed by the effect, and the effects output, it's going to go past its output fader, and then it's going to be directed on top of or blended with your main signal, your dry signal. So you have a dry signal, then you have your effect output, and those are actually blended together. What you end up hearing is a blend of those two, of the affected signal with that dry signal. And so that's how they're routing it. So that's what you're doing when you're applying effects like this. That's what's happening in the mixer. This is important to understand because of, I'm going to back off my sweet drawings here, because of this. Now we are looking at the monitor mix included here. So when you apply effects to a monitor, you're using this fader here, and that's all you have. So now it's running through all of your main processing. It all sounds great here. You bring up this fader here, and it is picking off the signal directly after the effect output and delivering it to that mix, to your mix as a whole. So the whole signal, the effects signal is going to your mix. That's important to know, because when you do that, depending on what channels you have going into the effect in the first place. So this up here, all of this stuff, let's see if I can, yeah, all of this can be repeated. So basically this is a single channel being directed to this effect. Any other channels, this is essentially doing the same things, being repeated by whatever channels are being sent to the effect. Now you could have multiple inputs going to this effect and then being output in total. By bringing the effects master fader up in an aux mix, you're again bringing the total and complete signal from your effects processor out to your aux. And that might include elements that you didn't initially want in that mix. In particular, what I've just done here, if I go back to my wizard, give you my screen view again. Hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully you're able to follow that. I go back into my wizard. So what I've done is I've got my vocals. I've got all three of my vocals plus my snare going to this effect, which sounds really sweet. And now I've sent it to this monitor, which means whether or not I have all of these elements in that mix directly, I'm going to have the affected representation, the affected signal for all of these in that mix. So I'm going to hear a really reverberated snare drum in this monitor now, and the singer might not want that. Most singers probably aren't going to want that. That's not something a singer typically wants in their monitor mix. So that can be, that can cause issues. The way you get around that is by doing this. So I've got my initial vocal set up here. I'm going to remove the snare from that because vocalist is complaining. That's bad. And I'm going to go to effects 2, and I'm going to set this up identically. So I'm going to choose the same plate reverb on effects 2, like that. D vocal plate is fine. We'll trust that it did it. I'm going to check here. Great, I've got my D vocal plate. Back to my wizard. And then I'm going to assign it to the snare. That's it. So now, in the main mix, there's no change. Everything sounds the same. But we're using two different effects now so that we can send one of them to our singer's monitor, and we're not going to get the snare signal brought in with it. Okay? So that is important to realize, important to know. Also, be careful or be aware of this when you do start to apply effects to monitors, because it can, as you can see, it can very quickly start to utilize and use up all your available effects processors. So just be cautious of this, and when singers or when musicians and things like that start to ask for these effects in their monitors, just be aware of that. Cool. So that's how you get around it. Hopefully that was a good outline there. I'm going to go ahead and press home. At this point, are there any other questions, any other concerns? I know we're right at about time, but I do have a really fun tip if you guys want to stick around for a few minutes. Now that we've learned all of this, now that we've seen how to use the effects, I got some insight from John Graves, who's the product manager here for TouchMix. He's a front of house mixing legend. He's got many years of experience as a professional front of house sound engineer, and he offered some advice that I'd like to pass on to you on how to set up a vocal channel, a lead vocal channel, how to really dial in a really great vocal sound. And it uses, the interesting thing about it is that it utilizes multiple effects. It's not just take this reverb and apply it to your vocalist at this level and it's going to sound great. There's a method of layering the effects themselves that can really help you utilize them kind of together and make a blend of effects that can really, really, really sweeten your channels, and in particular a vocal channel. So I'm going to go back to my main mix, and I'm going to walk you through his process here. Turn this up a little bit, and what we're going to do is we're going to use three things. We're going to use a delay initially, we're going to use a reverb, and we're also going to use something else that you might find interesting. Get this up here. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set up a delay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change my first effect here to just a mono delay, and this initial preset's fine. That 250 is fine. If you wanted to, you could go to the 120, back it off a little bit, and now we're going to get this reverb going. And the interesting thing that we're going to do with the reverb, what am I doing? Spacing out. Back to my effect here, is we're going to set the tempo initially. Now, a lot of people, and this is a fine way to do this, we'll use the tap tempo and find the exact tempo of the song and go with that. And that, for a lot of applications, is fine. It works great. What we're going to do, though, is we're going to alter it. We're going to offset it slightly, just slightly, though, and it's going to give us a little bit of a different vibe. And so we're kind of getting into vibe and mood with this a little bit here. So I'm going to find, I'll start with the tempo of the song. I'll find the tempo, the 8th note tempo, maybe to start with, of the song, and then I'll just kind of, I'll just nudge it a little bit from there, and we'll see what that does. So I'm going to hit play and record and get my track going. We're still got this isolated, perfect. So tap tempo, I'm going to find the 8th notes. Tap, 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 tap. There we go. About 197 on the 8th note. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to go to my effect. Now I'm going to bring it up so we can hear it. Yeah, okay. We should be hearing what that's doing. So we hear what it's doing. We're actually going to back it off so that it is just sitting under the vocal. So we still got it, yeah. Somewhere around there, okay. Now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to mute this. I'll reduce this channel for a second as I'm talking. I'll go back now on my second one. I'm going to go to my medium haul. Now I'm choosing medium haul here, but really when I'm not telling you to do this for every vocal. You're going to want to find the reverb. Let's get that down a little bit so I can talk. You're going to want to find the reverb that fits for your song and for your application and for your mood and for the style and all that stuff in it. So it might not be this. This is a great starting point, so I'm going to go with this, and I know that it kind of already works for this tune. But it has to do with the denseness, the thickness, and the size of your performance and of your mix, and just making sure that there's still clarity in the channel with the reverb applied. And that, again, that might be adjusting that pre-delay control to find that sweet spot in the reverb. But for this, I'm going to go ahead and make sure I got my live plate medium, not concert. Now I'm going to hit home. I've got that. I'm going to hit home one more time. Now I'm going to dial up get some audio. Dial up that reverb. We'll get it going strong there. Why are we not hearing that? Oh, because I turned it down. There it is. All right. There it is. And again, now we're hearing it. It's giving us a nice full effect. We're going to back this off as well, so that it is, again, just sitting under the vocal. So it's just kind of giving us some character. Get that pre-delay at about 40 there. That should be okay. All right. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to mute this. Go back out here. You can hear that immediately kind of dried it up a little bit when I took that out. Now, the third thing I'm going to use is a pitch shifter. I'm going to use it. I'm going to set this to very, very small amounts, and this is expressed in cents. So the left and the right are currently, you can see they're set to 5 and -5, and the left and the right. I'm going to take that down actually to 3 and 3. Oops, other way. So we've got 3 on the left, -3 on the right, and then on the right channel, the negative channel, I'm going to apply just 5 milliseconds of delay. And I'll have to restart my track here. But that's how we want to set. So this is a very, very, very subtle thing. And what we're going to use this for is to thicken that channel up. We're going to use this to thicken the vocal channel up. And it sort of gives us a semi-doubling effect. We're not going to apply it to the degree that it sounds like a double, though. We're just going to use it to thicken it up a little bit. Let me reset my audio here. There we are. All right. Dial this up. If I get that going really hot, you should be able to hear. Here you just hear a little bit of phasing now kind of happening, and that's kind of how it's adding that slight harmonization to the initial vocal. We don't want to hear that. We want to take it down, similar to what we did with our delay and our reverb. So it's kind of under the channel, just giving it a little pad. Yeah, I can set it to about like that. Okay, now we've got it thickened up a bit. I'm going to go ahead and open up the reverb and the delay. And try to take me down. Got a pretty nice sounding vocal channel. It's a nice trick. Let me go ahead and pull my mute grip off. You can hear the whole mix. He's going. Very good. So there you go. So there's mixing tips and tricks directly from John Graves. So I hope that was helpful to you. And that right there is an example of a great way to set up a vocal channel. But I also hope that it stirs up some creativity. You can use your effects together. You can create sort of effects blends, sort of like cooking, I guess. You can make a dish and you can just put some salt on it, or a lot of salt on it, or maybe you have a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, maybe some onion, some oregano, whatever you might want to add to that to kind of make a nice blend of flavors and create a more colored palette there. You can do the same kind of thing with your effects. So I hope that gave you some inspiration. Try some of the stuff out. If you've got a mixer, take our quarantine time here to dive into it, to figure it out, experiment with some things, get some audio going on your own, and play with these effects. Definitely check out the presets, because the presets are all killer, and they give you a really great sound instantly, and that is on the effects and the actual channel presets. So this thing is incredibly powerful and incredibly easy to use for what it can do. It can give you a very, very professional sound quickly and easily with all these various tools that we've got in here. So that will bring us to the conclusion of the effects webinar here. Are there any final questions or comments, remarks that anybody would like to throw out or ask? Hopefully we had hopefully we're all feeling pretty good about this. Cool.
We're good. We don't have any questions popping up.
No questions. All right. Well, then I must have done my job very well. I consider you all well informed. Perfect. Okay, well, then I'm going to go ahead and sign us off. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We are going to have, the next webinar is going to be this Friday. The link should be up for that. You can find that on the Facebook user group if you're a member of that. If you're not a member of that, definitely join that. You can also find that on the QSC website. On the landing page, there's a new button up there that says QSC at Home. You click on that one and you'll be able to navigate to the webinar series now. We're called Fresh Bites. So you can find it there. So that is live. There are still seats available for that. So jump in. We're going to be talking about recording. And we're going to be putting on another one next week. And the idea is for us to continue to do these a couple times a week with various topics. And we're actually going to revisit some of the topics that we have done over time. And I hope this is helpful. I hope you guys are getting some out of this. I appreciate you taking the time to join me this morning. And with that, everyone have a good day, good evening, good night, wherever you are, and stay safe. Thank you very much.